Sometimes the most powerful people in the world forget what real love looks like. Sometimes it takes a father's gentle hands guiding his little girl across a dance floor to remind us all what truly matters. At the city's most exclusive gala, CEO Alexandra Stephenson made a playful challenge to her wealthy guests. "If you can dance this waltz, I'll be yours." Rich men in expensive suits stepped forward, eager to impress the powerful woman who controlled billions. But nobody expected Tom Stone, a humble single father in a worn suit, to take his 8-year-old daughter Chloe's hand and step onto that marble floor. What happened next changed everything Alexandra thought she knew about love, power, and success. The quiet man, with calloused hands, and his bright-eyed daughter were about to teach a room full of millionaires a lesson they'd never forget. But could one dance really change two completely different worlds? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 37th floor of the Meridian Tower had always been Alexandra Stephenson's sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city she had helped shape through 15 years of calculated decisions and unwavering determination. At 42, she had built Stephenson Global into one of the most influential consulting firms in the world, advising Fortune 500 companies and world leaders alike. Yet as she stood in her corner office that Tuesday morning, adjusting the collar of her perfectly tailored Armani blazer, she couldn't shake the peculiar emptiness that had been growing stronger with each passing year. The morning light caught the crystal awards lining her mahogany shelves, recognition for business excellence, leadership, and innovation. Each one represented countless 18-hour days, sacrificed weekends, and relationships that withered under the weight of her ambitions. Her assistant Mia knocked gently and entered with the day's schedule, a routine they had perfected over 8 years of working together. The board meeting is at 10, lunch with the Henderson Group at noon, and the charity gala preparation committee at 4, Mia recited with professional efficiency. She paused, studying Alexandra's expression with the familiarity of someone who had witnessed both triumphs and quiet moments of doubt. "You seem distracted today." Alexandra turned from the window, her green eyes reflecting a weariness that expensive makeup couldn't entirely conceal. "Just thinking about tonight's event, the annual Children's Hospital Gala. It's become quite the spectacle over the years." The gala had indeed evolved from a modest fundraiser into the social event of the season, where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen while writing generous checks that eased their consciences. Alexandra served as the chairwoman, a position that came with both prestige and the burden of ensuring everything proceeded flawlessly. This year she had agreed to host the traditional Waltz competition, a light-hearted tradition where eligible bachelors competed for a dance with the evening's most prominent female guests. 15 miles across the city, Tom Stone was dealing with a very different kind of morning routine. The alarm clock beside his narrow bed had been buzzing for 10 minutes before he finally silenced it, his calloused hands reaching automatically for the framed photograph on his nightstand. Sarah's smiling face looked back at him, captured in a moment of pure joy during their last vacation together, before the cancer diagnosis changed everything. 3 years had passed since Sarah's death, but the absence still felt fresh some mornings. He whispered a quiet good morning to her photograph, a ritual that Chloe had once questioned but now accepted as part of their daily routine. The small apartment they shared in the Riverside district bore the marks of a single father doing his best: mismatched furniture acquired from thrift stores, children's artwork covering the refrigerator, and laundry that never quite seemed to find its way into drawers. "Daddy, you forgot to braid my hair again," came Chloe's voice from the hallway, accompanied by the sound of her bare feet padding across the worn linoleum floor. Tom smiled despite his exhaustion. At 8 years old, Chloe possessed her mother's infectious optimism and an imagination that transformed their modest circumstances into grand adventures. She appeared in the doorway wearing her favorite dress, a pale yellow sundress that Sarah had bought for her 6th birthday, now showing signs of being outgrown but still treasured. "Come here, princess," Tom said, patting his knee as he sat on the edge of the bed. His fingers worked through her dark curls with practiced gentleness, creating the neat French braid she preferred for school. "What's on the agenda for Miss Chloe?" "Stone today, art class, and Mrs. Martinez said we're going to learn about famous paintings." "Did you know some paintings are worth millions of dollars, Daddy? I want to see one someday, maybe in a big, fancy museum or a palace." Tom's chest tightened with the familiar pang of wanting to give his daughter experiences beyond their means. He worked 2 jobs, days at the construction site downtown and evenings at Ben's auto repair shop. But the bills seemed to multiply faster than his paychecks. Still, he had managed to save a small amount each month in what he called Chloe's Dream Fund, hoping someday to surprise her with something special. "Maybe we will see those paintings, sweetheart. You never know what adventures are waiting around the corner." After dropping Chloe at school, Tom headed to the construction site where he spent his days installing high-end fixtures in luxury condominiums. The irony wasn't lost on him. He helped create homes that cost more than he would earn in a lifetime, crafting spaces where wealthy families would make memories while he struggled to provide basic stability for his own daughter. His friend Ben had worked alongside him for 2 years, and their conversations during lunch breaks often centered on the challenge of single parenthood. Ben's situation differed slightly. His ex-wife had remarried and moved across the country, leaving him with weekend visitation rights that never felt like enough time with his 10-year-old son. "You hear about this charity thing tonight?" Ben asked, unwrapping a sandwich while they sat on a stack of lumber overlooking the city. "They're asking for volunteers to help with parking and setup. Pays decent for an evening's work." Tom had heard about the gala. It was difficult to miss the promotional materials that seemed to appear everywhere in the weeks leading up to the event. The Children's Hospital benefit attracted the city's most prominent citizens, and the newspaper coverage always featured photographs of elegantly dressed couples dancing in a ballroom that looked like something from a fairy tale. Chloe would lose her mind if she saw that ballroom, Tom mused, remembering his daughter's fascination with princess stories and elegant parties. She's been asking about fancy dresses and dancing ever since she saw that movie about the girl who goes to the royal ball. Ben studied his friend's face, recognizing the expression of a father calculating possibilities. "You know, my cousin works catering for these events sometimes. Says they're always short-handed and don't ask too many questions about paperwork. If you're willing to work hard, you could probably get in as extra help." The idea took root slowly. Tom wasn't the type to insert himself into situations where he didn't belong, but the thought of giving Chloe even a glimpse of the world she imagined in her bedtime stories was compelling. He knew she would never ask. She had learned early not to request things that might strain their budget, but her eyes lit up whenever she saw pictures of grand celebrations in her library books. That afternoon, while Chloe completed her homework at the small kitchen table, Tom found himself researching the gala online. The photographs from previous years showed a level of luxury he had only seen in movies. Women in designer gowns that cost more than his annual rent, men in perfectly tailored tuxedos, and a ballroom that sparkled with crystal chandeliers and fresh flowers. "What are you looking at, Daddy?" Chloe had appeared beside his chair, her chin resting on his shoulder as she studied the laptop screen. "Just some pictures from a fancy party," Tom replied, watching her expression transform as she took in the images of couples waltzing across a marble dance floor. "It looks like a real-life fairy tale," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "Do people really dress up like that and dance in castles?" Tom's decision crystallized in that moment. He called Ben's cousin that evening and learned that the catering company needed additional servers for the gala. The pay would help with next month's rent, and there was a chance, just a chance, that Chloe might be able to catch a glimpse of the ballroom during setup. Meanwhile, Alexandra was putting the finishing touches on her own preparations for the evening. Her personal shopper had selected a midnight blue gown that complemented her auburn hair, and her stylist had created an elegant updo that would photograph well for the society pages. The routine felt mechanical after years of similar events, each one blending into the next in a parade of forced smiles and strategic conversations. As she stood before the full-length mirror in her penthouse bedroom, Alexandra found herself thinking about the waltz competition she would host. The tradition had started 5 years earlier as a way to add entertainment value to the evening, but it had evolved into something more, a moment when the evening's formality gave way to something approaching genuine joy. She had danced with dozens of suitors over the years, each one accomplished, but somehow lacking the spark that would transform obligation into pleasure. Her reflection stared back at her, perfectly groomed and professionally accomplished, yet somehow incomplete. At 42, Alexandra had achieved everything she'd set out to accomplish in her career, but success had come with a loneliness she rarely acknowledged, even to herself. The gala preparations continued through the afternoon, with Tom arriving at the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel 3 hours before the first guests were expected. He had managed to arrange for Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor, to watch Chloe during the early setup, with the understanding that he might be able to bring her by later to see the decorations before the event began. The ballroom was a masterpiece of architectural elegance, with soaring ceilings, ornate moldings, and chandeliers that cast prismatic light across every surface. Tom found himself pausing in his work to absorb the grandeur, imagining Chloe's reaction to seeing such splendor in person. The catering supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Rosa, assigned Tom to the champagne service, a position that would keep him visible to the guests, but focused on maintaining the seamless operation that such events demanded. She fitted him with a black vest and bow tie that transformed his appearance from construction worker to service professional, though his calloused hands and weathered face still told the story of his true occupation. As the first guests began arriving, Tom watched from his position near the bar as the city's elite filled the ballroom. The women appeared to float rather than walk, their gowns creating a kaleidoscope of colors against the marble floor. The men moved with the confident bearing of those accustomed to power and privilege, their conversations peppered with references to business deals and vacation destinations that existed far beyond Tom's experience. Alexandra arrived fashionably, late, her entrance drawing subtle but unmistakable attention from everyone in the room. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, engaging in brief conversations that served multiple purposes, maintaining relationships, gathering information, and projecting the image of success that had become her trademark. Tom found himself studying her from across the room, struck by something that didn't quite align with her polished exterior. Despite being surrounded by admirers and associates, there was an isolation in her bearing that he recognized from his own experience with loss and solitude. The evening progressed with speeches from hospital administrators, presentations of generous donations, and the kind of networking that served as the true currency of such gatherings. Throughout it all, Tom maintained his professional demeanor while absorbing details he would later share with Chloe. The way the chandeliers created patterns of light on the walls, the elegant way the women held their champagne flutes, the sound of laughter that seemed to echo differently in such grand spaces. It was approaching 9 o'clock when Rosa informed him that he could take a brief break to collect Chloe from Mrs. Chen's apartment. The evening's formal program was concluding, and the dancing would begin shortly. If he hurried, there would be just enough time for his daughter to see the ballroom in all its glory before the crowd became too dense for a child to navigate safely. Tom's hands trembled slightly as he loosened his bow tie during the quick drive back to their apartment building. The evening had already exceeded his expectations. The glimpse into a world of elegance and refinement had given him stories that would entertain Chloe for months. But the opportunity to share even a moment of that magic with her felt like a gift beyond measure. He found Chloe waiting by the window in Mrs. Chen's living room, still wearing her yellow dress, but with her hair now adorned with a small ribbon that their neighbor had added. Her eyes were bright with anticipation, and she had been practicing curtsies that she had seen in her favorite movie. "Is it time, Daddy? Is it really like a fairy tale?" Tom knelt beside his daughter, adjusting the ribbon in her hair and trying to prepare her for the wonder that awaited. "It's even more beautiful than the pictures, Princess. But remember, we're just visiting. We'll watch for a little while, and then we'll come home, and I'll tell you all about the people and the music." The drive back to the hotel passed in a blur of Chloe's questions and Tom's attempts to manage her expectations. He had arranged with Rosa to bring Chloe through the service entrance, where she could observe the ballroom from a discreet vantage point near the kitchen doors. But fate, as it often does, had different plans entirely. As they approached the ballroom, the orchestra was beginning the evening's first waltz, and Alexandra was stepping to the center of the dance floor with her crystal champagne flute raised high. Her voice carried clearly across the room as she made her traditional announcement, the same words she had spoken for 5 consecutive years. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude this wonderful evening supporting our children's hospital, I invite our eligible gentlemen to join me for our traditional waltz competition. The rules are simple. If you can dance this waltz, I'll be yours for the remainder of the evening." The wealthy suitors began forming a line, each confident in his ability to impress the most powerful woman in the room. Tom intended to shepherd Chloe to their designated observation spot, but she had stopped walking entirely, her small hand gripping his with surprising strength. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice filled with the kind of awe that only children can truly experience. "She's the most beautiful princess I've ever seen, and she's asking for a dance partner, just like in Cinderella." Tom followed his daughters' gaze to where Alexandra stood, elegant and composed, in her midnight blue gown, waiting for the first gentleman to accept her challenge. For a moment, he saw her through Chloe's eyes, not as an intimidating business executive, but as a lonely princess waiting for someone worthy to ask her to dance. In his pocket, his fingers found the worn gold wedding band he still carried everywhere, Sarah's final gift to him, removed from her finger during her last days in the hospital and pressed into his palm with a whispered promise that love would find him again when he was ready. "Can we watch the dancing, Daddy, please? Just for one song." Tom looked down at his daughter's hopeful face, then back at the scene unfolding before them. The first suitor had already approached Alexandra, executing a technically perfect but emotionally vacant waltz that left both participants looking relieved when it ended. And somewhere in that moment, as Chloe tugged gently on his hand and Alexandra's eyes swept the room with what he now recognized as disappointed hope, Tom Stone made a decision that would change everything for all of them. The orchestra's strings began the opening notes of Chopin's Waltz in A-flat major, a piece Alexandra had chosen for its technical complexity and emotional depth. From her position at the center of the ballroom, she watched as the evening's first volunteer approached with the confident stride of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Richard Blackwell III possessed all the qualities that should have made him an ideal dance partner. Harvard MBA, family fortune dating back 4 generations, and the kind of classical training that came with private tutors and European finishing schools. His form was impeccable as he offered his arm, his posture perfect as they began to move across the marble floor. Yet, as they glided through the prescribed steps, Alexandra felt the familiar disappointment settling over her like a well-worn cloak. Richard's technique was flawless, but his touch was calculating rather than gentle, his leading more about demonstrating skill than creating connection. When he spun her during the waltz's crescendo, his eyes were focused on the watching crowd rather than on her, already performing for the applause that would surely follow. The dance concluded with Richard's elaborate bow and a polite smile that never reached Alexandra's eyes. The audience responded with appropriate enthusiasm, but she could feel the hollow echo of yet another performance masquerading as romance. "Marvelous as always, Alexandra," Richard murmured as he escorted her back to the center of the floor. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation over dinner next week." "Perhaps," she replied with practiced diplomacy, already turning her attention to the next gentleman stepping forward. From their position near the kitchen doors, Chloe pressed closer to the ornate entrance, her small face glowing with excitement, as she watched the elegant couples moving like characters from her favorite storybooks. Tom kept one protective hand on her shoulder while managing the champagne tray he had been assigned to circulate, torn between his duties and his daughter's obvious enchantment with the spectacle. "Look, Daddy," Chloe whispered, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper from her dress pocket. "I made a dance card like the ladies in my books." Tom examined his daughter's creation, a carefully folded paper adorned with crayon drawings of dancing figures and her attempt at elegant script, listing imaginary partners. The innocent artistry of it, combined with the wonder in her eyes as she watched the real dancers, stirred something deep in his chest. The second suitor proved to be James Morrison, a tech entrepreneur whose recent IPO had made him one of the city's youngest billionaires. Unlike Richard's classical approach, James attempted to impress Alexandra with unconventional moves that drew murmurs from the crowd, but left her looking more bemused than charmed. "I thought we might jazz it up a little," James explained, as he attempted a dip that was more flashy than graceful. "Traditional waltzing is so predictable." But Alexandra had been dancing since childhood, and she could feel the disconnect between James's enthusiasm and his actual skill. His rhythm was slightly off, his leading inconsistent, and his conversation during the dance focused entirely on his latest business ventures rather than the music or the moment they were supposed to be sharing. As the second waltz concluded, Alexandra's smile had grown more strained. Mia, watching from the sidelines, recognized the subtle signs of her employer's growing frustration, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed against her champagne flute during the brief pause between partners. Chloe had been growing increasingly restless, tugging gently on Tom's vest as she watched the beautiful lady dance with men who seemed to be trying too hard to impress her rather than simply enjoying the music. "Daddy," she said suddenly, her voice carrying the clarity that children possess when they see something adults have missed. "That princess looks sad, even when she's smiling, like when you look at Mommy's pictures and try to pretend you're not crying." Tom followed his daughter's gaze and saw what she meant. Despite Alexandra's polished exterior and gracious demeanor, there was something indefinably melancholy in her expression, a loneliness that her role as the evening's hostess couldn't entirely mask. The third suitor stepped forward, Charles Henderson, heir to a manufacturing fortune and widely considered one of the city's most eligible bachelors. His approach to the waltz was competent but mechanical, each step executed with the precision of someone who had been taught to dance as a social requirement rather than artistic expression. As they moved through the familiar patterns, Alexandra found herself going through the motions, while her mind wandered to the emails waiting in her inbox, the board meeting scheduled for Monday morning, and the persistent sense that she was trapped in a beautiful but ultimately meaningless routine. Charles sensed her distraction and tried to recapture her attention with conversation about a mutual business acquaintance, effectively turning their dance into a networking opportunity. By the time the music ended, Alexandra was questioning why she had agreed to continue this tradition for another year. "Thank you, Charles," she said, with genuine warmth that didn't quite match her internal exhaustion. That was lovely. But as she watched him retreat to accept congratulations from his friends, Alexandra felt a familiar emptiness settling over her. The evening would continue with more dancing, more networking, and more of the sophisticated loneliness that had become her constant companion. It was then that Chloe made her decision. Before Tom could react, His 8-year-old daughter had slipped away from his protective grasp and was walking purposefully toward the center of the ballroom. Her yellow sundress stood out among the designer gowns like a sunflower in a field of orchids, and her determined steps carried her directly to where Alexandra stood waiting for the next volunteer. "Excuse me, Your Majesty," Chloe said with the perfect curtsy. She'd been practicing all evening, her small voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush that had fallen over the crowd. "My daddy is the best dancer in the whole world, and he's very lonely just like you are. Would you like to dance with us?" The ballroom fell completely silent. Alexandra looked down at the earnest little girl with dark curls and bright eyes, then followed Chloe's gaze to where Tom stood frozen near the entrance, his face a mixture of mortification and protective love. Tom's first instinct was to apologize profusely and remove Chloe from the situation as quickly as possible. He had never felt more out of place than in that moment, acutely aware of his borrowed formal wear, his calloused hands, and the hundreds of curious eyes now focused on them. But as he started to move forward to collect his daughter, Alexandra did something unexpected. She knelt down to Chloe's level, bringing herself eye to eye with the child who had just disrupted one of the city's most exclusive social events. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Alexandra asked, her voice gentle and genuinely curious. "I'm Chloe Stone, and that's my daddy Tom. He taught me to dance in our kitchen, and he always makes sure I don't fall down. He's very good at keeping people safe." Alexandra glanced again at Tom, who was now approaching with the careful movements of someone trying to minimize a social catastrophe. She noticed details that would have escaped her attention in any other context. The way his worry was entirely focused on his daughter rather than his own embarrassment. The genuine love that radiated from every line of his body as he looked at Chloe, and the quiet dignity with which he carried himself despite clearly being far from his natural environment. "I'm very sorry," Tom began, his voice steady despite his obvious discomfort. "She didn't mean any harm. She's just excited about the dancing, and sometimes she speaks before she thinks." "Don't apologize," Alexandra said, rising gracefully to her full height. "She's absolutely right. I am lonely, and if you're half the dancer she claims, I'd be honored to have this waltz." The crowd's murmur shifted from curious to scandalized, but Alexandra found herself genuinely intrigued by the man who had spent the evening serving champagne while his daughter dreamed of fairy tale balls. There was something refreshingly authentic about both of them that stood in stark contrast to the calculated charm she had been experiencing all evening. Tom hesitated, acutely aware that accepting would mean stepping far beyond the boundaries of his temporary employment and into a situation that could embarrass all three of them. But Chloe was looking at him with such hope, and Alexandra's invitation seemed sincere rather than merely polite. "I should mention that I've never danced anywhere fancier than my living room," Tom said, offering his arm with the same careful attention he brought to all of his responsibilities. "And Chloe is used to being my partner. Then this will be a first for all of us," Alexandra replied, taking his arm while extending her other hand to Chloe. "Shall we show them how it's really done?" As the orchestra began the fourth waltz of the evening, something magical happened on that marble dance floor. Tom's approach to dancing was nothing like the technical perfection Alexandra had experienced all evening. His steps were simpler, his leading more intuitive than trained, but there was a gentleness in his touch and a complete focus on his partners that transformed the familiar music into something entirely new. With Chloe between them, the three moved not with the precision of professional dancers, but with the joy of a family sharing a moment of pure happiness. Tom's attention was divided between ensuring Alexandra felt comfortable and making sure Chloe didn't become overwhelmed by the grandeur surrounding them. Alexandra found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. There was no pressure to perform, no calculation required, just the simple pleasure of moving to beautiful music with people who were entirely present in the moment. When Tom spun Chloe gently, the little girl's delighted laughter echoed through. the ballroom, and Alexandra felt something she had almost forgotten: spontaneous joy. The watching crowd had grown completely quiet, many of them recognizing that they were witnessing something far more meaningful than the evening's previous entertainment. This wasn't a performance or a competition. It was a glimpse into the kind of authentic connection that many of them had forgotten was possible. As the waltz reached its conclusion, Tom guided them into a simple bow that somehow felt more elegant than all the elaborate gestures that had preceded it. The silence that followed was profound, lasting several heartbeats before erupting into applause that was warmer and more genuine than anything the evening had yet produced. Chloe beamed with the satisfaction of a successful matchmaker, while Tom looked simultaneously proud of his daughter and terrified of the attention they had attracted. Alexandra, still holding both their hands, felt tears threatening for the first time in years, not from sadness, but from the unexpected reminder that beauty could be found in the simplest gestures. "Thank you," she said softly. Her words meant for both father and daughter, but carrying a weight that encompassed far more than gratitude for a single dance. As the crowd began to disperse and the evening's formal program drew to a close, Alexandra found herself reluctant to let this moment end. She had danced with dozens of accomplished partners over the years, but none had left her feeling so completely present, so genuinely moved. "Would you like to stay for the reception?" she asked, the invitation extending to both stones. "There's no pressure, but Chloe seems to be enjoying the fairy tale." Tom glanced down at his daughter, whose eyes were bright with excitement and exhaustion in equal measure. He knew she would remember this evening for the rest of her life, regardless of what happened next. "If you're sure we wouldn't be imposing," he replied, his natural courtesy overriding his awareness of how out of place they were. And so the evening that had begun with Alexandra issuing a playful challenge to her usual circle of suitors ended, with her introducing a construction worker and his 8-year-old daughter to some of the city's most influential residents, all of whom were struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The transformation had been subtle but unmistakable. Alexandra's practiced smile had been replaced by genuine warmth, and Tom's defensive wariness had given way to quiet confidence. As he watched his daughter charm everyone she met with her innocent observations about their beautiful clothes and elegant manners. As the last guests began to depart and the cleaning crew started dismantling the evening's decorations, Alexandra found herself facing a question she hadn't anticipated when she had issued her traditional challenge. What happened when someone actually succeeded in claiming the prize? And what did it mean when that victory came not from polished technique, but from authentic connection? The aftermath of the waltz lingered like perfume in the air long after the last guest had departed. Alexandra stood in her penthouse apartment at 2 a.m, still wearing her midnight blue gown, but with her elegant updo now loose around her shoulders. The city sparkled below her windows, but her mind kept returning to the moment when Tom Stone's calloused hand had taken hers with such careful reverence. She retrieved her purse from the marble countertop and withdrew the business cards she had given him just before he left with a sleeping Chloe in his arms. The embossed letters of Alexandra Stephenson, CEO, Stephenson Global, felt suddenly formal and cold compared to the warmth that had passed between them during those few minutes on the dance floor. Mia had stayed behind to help with the evening's wrap-up, and her knowing looks hadn't gone unnoticed. "That was unexpected," she had said simply, but her tone carried years of friendship beneath the professional courtesy. "Yes, it was," Alexandra had replied, offering no further explanation because she couldn't yet articulate what had happened. To herself, now, in the quiet of her perfectly appointed home, she found herself replaying not just the dance, but the entire evening through different eyes. Tom's obvious discomfort with the opulent surroundings hadn't been the social climbing she was accustomed to seeing at such events. Instead, he had seemed almost protective of his daughter's innocence, careful to shield her from any sense that they didn't belong, while still allowing her to experience the magic she so clearly craved. 15 miles away, Tom was having his own moment of reflection as he watched Chloe sleep in her narrow bed. She had chatted excitedly during the drive home, reliving every moment of the evening with the detailed memory that children bring to experiences that exceed their wildest dreams. "The princess has the most beautiful green eyes, Daddy. And she smelled like flowers, and did you see how her dress sparkled when she moved? It was like she was made of starlight." Chloe's words had been slurred with exhaustion, but her joy had been unmistakable. Now sitting in the small living room with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, Tom found himself studying Alexandra's business card. The paper was thick and expensive, with elegant typography that spoke of a world far removed from his own. Yet he could still feel the sincerity in her voice when she had thanked them, the genuine emotion that had softened her polished exterior. He had tucked the card into his wallet next to Sarah's photograph, two reminders of the women who had touched his life in ways he was still trying to understand. 3 days passed before Tom found the courage to make the call. He had composed and discarded a dozen different opening lines, unsure how to bridge the gap between their very different worlds. Finally, with Chloe at school and a rare free afternoon ahead of him, he dialed the number on the elegant business card. "Stephenson Global, Alexandra Stephenson's office," came Mia's professional greeting. "This is Tom Stone. I wondered if I might speak with Miss Stephenson for a moment." There was a brief pause, then Mia's voice warmed noticeably. "Of course, Mr. Stone. Please hold while I connect you." Alexandra was in the middle of reviewing quarterly reports when Mia knocked and entered with an expression that managed to be both discreet and knowing. "Tom Stone is on line 1, she said simply, but her slight smile conveyed what she thought of this development. Alexandra felt her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with business deals or boardroom negotiations. "Put him through, please. Miss Stephenson?" Tom's voice carried the same careful courtesy she remembered from their brief conversation at the gala. "Please call me Alexandra, and thank you for calling. I've been hoping you would. I wanted to thank you again for including Chloe in the evening. She hasn't stopped talking about it, and I think she's convinced herself that you're an actual princess." Alexandra laughed, a sound that felt more natural than it had in years. "Well, I'm afraid I'm significantly less magical than she believes, but I'm honored to have made such an impression. How is she?" "She's wonderful, actually. She's been asking if she might see you again sometime. She has this idea that you might like to visit our home, though I warned her that our apartment isn't exactly what you're probably used to." The invitation hung in the air between them, tentative but genuine. Alexandra found herself genuinely curious about Tom's world, about how he and Chloe had created their life together. "I would love to visit," she said, surprising herself with how quickly the words came. "If you're sure I wouldn't be intruding, you wouldn't be intruding at all." Chloe would be thrilled. They arranged for Alexandra to visit the following Saturday afternoon, a plan that left both of them feeling simultaneously excited and apprehensive about what this next step might reveal. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering practical details, but really serving as an excuse for both of them to extend this unexpected connection. When they finally hung up, Alexandra found herself smiling in a way that Mia noticed immediately upon entering the office. "Good news, I take it?" Mia asked, with the familiarity of someone who had witnessed years of Alexandra's professional triumphs, but rarely seen this kind of personal happiness. "I'm going to visit them on Saturday," Alexandra said, then paused as she realized the implications. "I should probably cancel the Henderson Group meeting." "Consider it cancelled," Mia replied, making a note in her planner. "And might I suggest that you wear something casual? From what I observed at the gala, they seem to value authenticity over formality." That evening, Alexandra found herself going through her wardrobe with an attention to detail she usually reserved for important client meetings. The challenge was finding something that would be appropriate for a modest apartment visit while still feeling like herself. Most of her clothes were designed for boardrooms and social events, leaving her with limited options for casual family time. Finally, she settled on dark jeans, expensive but understated, and a cashmere sweater that managed to be both elegant and approachable. The outfit felt foreign after years of power suits and cocktail dresses, but it also felt like a step toward understanding who she might be outside the professional identity that had defined her for so long. Meanwhile, across town, Tom was having his own wardrobe consultation with Chloe, who had appointed herself as the official advisor for Saturday's visit. "You should wear the blue shirt, Daddy. It makes your eyes look pretty, and princesses like pretty eyes." "She's not actually a princess, sweetheart," Tom reminded her gently. "She's a very successful businesswoman who was kind enough to dance with us." "She's a princess to me," Chloe replied, with the absolute certainty that 8-year-olds brought to their convictions. "And she's coming to our house because she likes us, not because she has to for work." The simple wisdom of his daughter's observation struck Tom as profoundly true. Alexandra was choosing to spend her Saturday afternoon with them, despite having countless other options that would be more familiar and comfortable. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made everything seem possible. Alexandra drove through neighborhoods she had never visited, watching the city change from gleaming downtown towers to tree-lined streets with modest homes and small gardens. The Riverside Gardens apartment complex was exactly what she had expected, well-maintained, but clearly designed for working families rather than luxury living. She parked her Mercedes next to pickup trucks and economy cars, feeling slightly self-conscious about the disparity, but determined not to let class differences interfere with this opportunity to know Tom and Chloe better. Tom met her in the parking lot, wearing the blue shirt Chloe had recommended, and clean jeans that emphasized his tall, solid frame. His nervous smile was endearingly genuine as he led her toward the building. "Fair warning," he said as they climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor. "Chloe has been cleaning and organizing all morning. I think she's rearranged her art supplies 3 times. The apartment door opened before they reached it, revealing Chloe in her best dress, with her hair in elaborate braids that had clearly required considerable effort. "Princess Alexandra," she exclaimed, then caught herself. "I mean, Miss Alexandra. Daddy said I should use your real name." "Princess Alexandra works just fine," Alexandra replied, accepting Chloe's enthusiastic hug. "And you look absolutely beautiful." The apartment was small, but immaculately clean, with furnishings that spoke of careful budgeting and creative solutions. Alexandra noticed immediately how the space had been arranged to maximize Chloe's comfort. Her artwork displayed prominently on the refrigerator, a cozy reading corner with pillows and blankets, and toys organized in a way that suggested this was truly a child's home rather than an adult space grudgingly shared. "Would you like to see my room?" Chloe asked, taking Alexandra's hand with the confidence of a perfect hostess. The child's bedroom was a testament to imagination triumphing over limited resources. Handmade decorations covered the walls, paper, flowers, crayon drawings of castles, and a carefully constructed mobile of stars cut from cardboard and painted with glitter. The bed was neatly made with a quilt that looked hand-stitched, and stuffed animals were arranged with the precision of a formal reception line. "Daddy made me the bookshelf," Chloe explained proudly, pointing to painted wooden shelves that held an impressive collection of library books. "And I drew all the pictures of Mommy so she could watch over me while I sleep." Alexandra's breath caught as she noticed the framed photographs scattered throughout the room, a beautiful woman with Chloe's dark curls and bright smile, captured in moments of obvious joy and love. These weren't formal portraits, but candid shots of a family that had been deeply happy before tragedy intervened. "She's beautiful," Alexandra said softly, studying a photograph of Sarah laughing, while Chloe, much younger, sat on her lap, covered in finger paint. "She taught me to paint and sing songs," Chloe explained matter-of-factly. Daddy says she's still with us, just in a different way now. Like how the stars are still there during the day, even when we can't see them. Tom appeared in the doorway, having hung back to give them time to connect. His expression as he watched Alexandra genuinely engage with his daughter's memories was one of cautious hope mixed with protective wariness. I hope you don't mind Chloe talking about Sarah, he said quietly. She likes to include her in everything. I don't mind at all, Alexandra replied, and meant it. There was something refreshing about Chloe's matter-of-fact approach to loss and memory, so different from the way most adults tried to avoid mentioning painful subjects. They spent the afternoon in a way that was entirely new for Alexandra, sitting on the living room floor while Chloe demonstrated her art projects, listening to stories about school friends and favorite books, and sharing a simple lunch of sandwiches and fruit that somehow tasted better than the elaborate meals she usually ate at business functions. Tom watched Alexandra interact with his daughter with growing amazement. There was nothing forced or patronizing about her attention. She seemed genuinely interested in Chloe's 8-year-old perspectives on everything from favorite colors to career aspirations, which currently included princess, artist, and veterinarian. Can I show Alexandra my dancing? Chloe asked as they finished lunch. Tom's expression grew slightly embarrassed. Chloe, I'm sure Alexandra has things to do. Actually, I'd love to see your dancing, Alexandra interrupted. Would you teach me some of your moves? What followed was a 20-minute dance party in the small living room, with Tom's phone providing music while Chloe demonstrated the steps she had learned from online videos and her father's patient instruction. Alexandra found herself laughing in a way she hadn't in years, completely unself-conscious as she attempted to follow Chloe's enthusiastic choreography. When Tom finally joined them, moving with the easy grace that had impressed her at the gala, Alexandra felt that same spark of connection that had surprised her on the ballroom floor. But here, in his own space, Tom seemed more relaxed and confident, his natural leadership evident in the gentle way he guided both his partners through the improvised routine. As the afternoon wound down, Alexandra found herself reluctant to leave. The apartment had felt more like home in a few hours than her penthouse had in months of solitary evenings. Thank you for inviting me, she said to Tom as Chloe gathered her artwork to send home with their guest. This has been wonderful. Thank you for coming and for being so kind to Chloe. She's been excited about this all week. Alexandra knelt down to accept Chloe's goodbye hug and the carefully rolled drawings that were her parting gifts. I hope I can see you both again soon. Would you like to come to my school's art show next Friday? Chloe asked, with the direct honesty that adults often lost. I have 3 paintings in it, and Daddy always comes, but he says it gets lonely being the only parent there sometimes. Alexandra glanced at Tom, who looked mortified by his daughter's candid observation about his social isolation. I would be honored to attend your art show, she said seriously. Should I wear something special for such an important event? Chloe considered this with the gravity it deserved. Maybe something sparkly but not too fancy. It's at the school, not a castle. Driving home through the city streets, Alexandra found herself seeing her surroundings differently. The gleaming towers of the business district that had always represented success and achievement now seemed strangely cold compared to the warmth of the small apartment where a father and daughter had created their own version of happiness from very simple materials. That evening she called her mother for the first time in 6 weeks, something she realized with embarrassment as Margaret Stephenson's familiar voice came through the phone. Alexandra, darling, what a pleasant surprise. I was just thinking about you. I wanted to tell you about something that happened this week, Alexandra began, then found herself describing the gala, the unexpected dance, and the afternoon with Tom and Chloe in greater detail than she had shared anything personal with her mother in years. He sounds like a good man, Margaret said when Alexandra finished, and his daughter sounds delightful. It's been a long time since I've heard you talk about anyone with such warmth. It's complicated, Mother. We come from very different worlds. Do you remember what your father used to say about that? Margaret's voice carried the gentle wisdom of a woman who had raised her daughter to be strong but sometimes worried she had become too isolated in her strength. He said that the best relationships weren't between people from the same world, but between people who could create a new world together. The words stayed with Alexandra through the rest of the evening, resonating in a way that her mother's advice hadn't in years. She found herself wondering what kind of world she and Tom might create together, and whether she had the courage to find out. Meanwhile, Tom was putting Chloe to bed and listening to her excited recap of the day's events. "I really like Princess Alexandra, Daddy. She listened to all my stories and didn't look bored even once. And she laughed at my jokes, even the ones that weren't very funny. She is pretty special," Tom agreed, smoothing the quilt around his daughter's shoulders. "Do you think she gets lonely in her big castle? She seemed happy here with us." Tom considered the question seriously. "I think she might be lonely sometimes, sweetheart. Being important and successful can be wonderful, but it can also be isolating. Maybe she could come have dinner with us sometime. I could make my famous spaghetti." Tom smiled at his daughter's confidence in her culinary skills, which primarily involved helping him prepare simple meals. "Maybe she could. Would you like that?" "I think Mommy would like her," Chloe said, with the matter-of-fact certainty that had become her way of processing her mother's continued presence in their lives. "She always said you deserve someone who would make you smile the way you used to." The observation hit Tom with unexpected force. He hadn't realized how much his grief had changed his demeanor, until Chloe pointed out that Alexandra seemed to restore something he had thought permanently lost. That night, after Chloe was asleep, Tom sat in the living room, looking through the drawings she had created for Alexandra. One in particular caught his attention, a family portrait that included a tall woman with long hair standing beside Tom and Chloe, all three figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. His daughter's imagination had created what his practical, adult mind hadn't dared to envision. But looking at the simple drawing, Tom found himself wondering if Chloe's childlike faith in happy endings might be wiser than his careful caution. He placed the school permission slip that he had been reviewing for Chloe's upcoming field trip next to her artwork, both documents representing the daily realities of single parenthood that Alexandra had begun to understand and accept without judgment. The elementary school art show proved to be a revelation for Alexandra in ways she hadn't anticipated. She arrived wearing a navy dress with subtle silver details, sparkly but not too fancy, as Chloe had specified, and found herself in a world completely removed from her usual experience. The hallways buzzed with proud parents, excited children, and teachers who managed to maintain enthusiasm despite the chaos of dozens of families crowding into spaces designed for much smaller groups. Alexandra found Tom easily enough. He stood out among the other parents, not because of his appearance, but because of the obvious pride and attention he focused entirely on his daughter. "You came!" Chloe exclaimed, rushing to Alexandra's side, with the unself-conscious joy that had become familiar. "Wait until you see my paintings. Mrs. Martinez hung them right by the entrance so everyone can see them first." Alexandra dutifully admired Chloe's artwork, which showed remarkable creativity and technical skill for an 8-year-old. But what struck her most was watching Tom interact with the other parents, polite and friendly, but clearly conscious of being different in ways that went beyond just being a single father. "Tom's daughter is remarkably talented," said a woman who introduced herself as Ben's ex-wife, visiting for their son's art display. "He's done an amazing job raising her on his own." The comment was well-intentioned, but Alexandra noticed how it emphasized Tom's single status in a way that seemed to set him apart from the married couples who formed the majority of the parent community. She found herself moving closer to him, not possessively, but in a gesture of subtle support. "Alexandra, this is my friend Ben," Tom said, introducing a man whose weathered hands and easy smile marked him as someone who understood the challenges of working-class single parenthood. Ben, this is Alexandra Stephenson. The famous Alexandra, Ben said with a grin that was friendly but assessing. Chloe hasn't stopped talking about you. According to her, you're somewhere between a Disney princess and a superhero. I'm flattered, though I suspect the reality is somewhat less exciting than Chloe's version, Alexandra replied, immediately liking Ben's straightforward manner. As the evening progressed, Alexandra found herself drawn into conversations with teachers and other parents, many of whom were curious about Tom's elegant companion, but too polite to ask direct questions. She handled the subtle scrutiny with the same grace she brought to business negotiations, but she was also aware of a protective instinct regarding Tom and Chloe that surprised her with its intensity. "They're lucky to have you," said Chloe's teacher, Mrs. Martinez, during a quiet moment. "Tom is wonderful, but he tries to do everything alone. It's nice to see him with someone who clearly cares about both of them." The assumption that Alexandra and Tom were a couple should have been uncomfortable, but instead she found it oddly natural. She had slipped into the role of supportive partner without conscious thought, and Tom had included her in conversations with the easy familiarity of someone accustomed to sharing parental responsibilities. On the drive back to their apartment, Alexandra had offered to give them a ride, since Tom had taken the bus to accommodate Chloe's large art projects. Chloe chattered happily about the evening's success. "Everyone liked my paintings, and Mrs. Martinez said I might be able to enter the citywide student art contest next year. And Jessica's mom asked if you were my new mom, and I said not yet, but maybe someday if you wanted to be." Alexandra and Tom exchanged glances in the rearview mirror, both of them suddenly aware of how quickly and naturally this relationship was evolving beyond their conscious control. "Chloe," Tom said gently, "remember what we talked about, making assumptions." "I know, Daddy. But Alexandra fits with us, don't you think? Like when you find the exact right puzzle piece and it just clicks into place." From the mouths of babes, Alexandra thought, but she didn't voice the observation. Instead, she found herself wondering when, not if, but when, she and Tom would need to have an honest conversation about what was developing between them and where it might lead. That conversation came sooner than either of them expected, prompted by an incident that forced them both to confront the realities of their very different social positions. The following week, Alexandra invited Tom and Chloe to join her for dinner at her penthouse, wanting to reciprocate their hospitality and give Chloe a chance to see the castle she had been imagining. The evening started beautifully, with Chloe marveling at the city views and the elegant furnishings, while Tom seemed genuinely impressed by Alexandra's art collection and the obvious care she had taken in creating a beautiful living space. But during dessert, while Chloe was exploring the balcony garden under Tom's watchful supervision, Alexandra made a decision that revealed the growing depth of her feelings. She excused herself briefly and returned with a small wrapped box. "I saw this and thought of Chloe," she said, offering the gift with the same nervous energy she brought to important business presentations. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm shaped like a dancer, clearly expensive but chosen. With genuine thoughtfulness rather than as a display of wealth, Chloe's reaction was everything Alexandra had hoped for, delight and wonder that were entirely out of proportion to the gift's actual value. But Tom's expression was more complex, a mixture of gratitude and something that looked like concern. "Alexandra, this is beautiful, but you don't need to buy Chloe gifts," he said carefully. "She already thinks you're wonderful just for spending time with us." "I wanted to," Alexandra replied, but she could see that her gesture had created an uncomfortable dynamic she hadn't anticipated. Later that evening, after they had returned home and Chloe was asleep, with the bracelet carefully placed on her nightstand, Tom found himself confronting emotions he hadn't expected to feel. The gift had been thoughtful and appropriate, but it also highlighted the vast difference in their financial circumstances in a way that made him question his own ability to provide adequately for his daughter. He opened Sarah's jewelry box for the first time in months, looking at the simple pieces his late wife had treasured: her wedding ring, a pair of pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's, and a locket containing Chloe's baby picture. None of it was particularly valuable in monetary terms, but each piece carried the weight of love and memory that couldn't be purchased. As he held Sarah's wedding ring, Tom found himself thinking about the conversation with his daughter earlier that week, when she had innocently asked if Alexandra might become her new mommy someday. The idea wasn't unwelcome. In fact, it had begun to feel like a natural progression of their growing closeness, but it also forced him to confront his own fears about opening his heart completely to someone new. The next morning brought a phone call that would test the strength of their developing relationship in ways none of them had anticipated. Alexandra was in her office reviewing contracts when Mia knocked and entered with an expression of barely controlled excitement. "There's a reporter from the Society Chronicle on line 2, Mia announced. "She wants to ask about your romantic involvement with a local construction worker and his daughter." Alexandra felt her stomach drop as she realized their relationship had attracted the attention of the gossip columnist, who made it her business to chronicle the personal lives of the city's prominent citizens. The Society Chronicle wasn't malicious, but it wasn't particularly discreet either. "Put her through," Alexandra said, deciding that honesty was the better approach than attempting to deny what was clearly already public knowledge. The conversation that followed was brief but pointed. The reporter had somehow learned about their relationship and was planning to run a piece in the weekend edition about Alexandra's unlikely romance with a working-class single father. "We're not trying to be invasive," the reporter assured her. "It's actually a rather sweet story about love crossing social boundaries. Very inspiring, really." But Alexandra could hear the underlying tone that suggested the story would focus as much on the novelty of their class difference as on any genuine romance. After ending the call, she sat in her office contemplating the implications of their relationship becoming public in a way that emphasized their different backgrounds. That evening, she called Tom to warn him about the potential publicity, but she could tell from his voice that he had already received a similar call. "Are you concerned about this affecting your business?" Tom asked, his tone carefully neutral, in a way that suggested he was prepared for her to choose professional reputation over personal happiness. "I'm more concerned about how it might affect you and Chloe," Alexandra replied honestly. "Neither of you asked for this kind of attention." "We can handle whatever comes," Tom said, but she could hear the underlying tension in his voice. "The question is whether you can." The conversation ended with both of them promising to discuss the situation further after they had time to process what public attention might mean for their relationship. But Alexandra found herself lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling and wondering whether she was strong enough to weather the scrutiny that would inevitably come with loving someone from a different social world. The Society Chronicle article appeared on Saturday morning with a headline that made Alexandra's heart sink. "CEO's charity case, love or publicity stunt." The piece itself wasn't cruel, but it painted their relationship in terms that reduced Tom to a curiosity and Alexandra to either a saint or a social climber, depending on the reader's perspective. The article included photographs from the elementary school art show and quotes from unnamed sources speculating about Alexandra's motivations for dating significantly beneath her social status. While it mentioned Tom's character and devotion to his daughter, the overall tone suggested that their relationship was noteworthy, primarily because of how unusual it was for someone of Alexandra's position to be involved with a working-class single father. Alexandra was in her kitchen, staring at the newspaper over her untouched coffee, when her phone began ringing with calls from friends, business associates, and relatives she hadn't spoken to in months. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: surprise, curiosity, and barely concealed judgment about her choice in romantic partners. "I had no idea you were seeing someone," said her college roommate during the third call of the morning. "Is it serious, or are you just trying to make a statement about social consciousness?" The assumption that her relationship with Tom could only be explained as either charity work or political posturing hurt more than Alexandra had expected. She found herself defending not just Tom's character, but her own capacity for genuine emotion. Meanwhile, 15 miles away, Tom was dealing with his own version of the same scrutiny. His co-workers at the construction site had seen the article, and their reactions ranged from good-natured ribbing to poorly concealed resentment. "So you're the guy dating the rich lady," said Jake Morrison, the same colleague who had made snide remarks weeks earlier. "Must be nice to have someone who can solve all your financial problems." "It's not like that," Tom replied quietly. But he could see that his denials only fueled more speculation about his motivations. Ben appeared at his elbow during lunch break, offering the kind of steady support that had gotten Tom through the worst days after Sarah's death. "Don't let them get to you. People always assume the worst when they can't understand something. Maybe they have a point," Tom said, voicing the doubts that had been growing since the article's publication. "Maybe I am taking advantage of her. A kindness, letting Chloe get attached to someone who's eventually going to realize this was all a mistake." "You know that's not true," Ben replied firmly. "I've seen the way she looks at you and Chloe. That's not charity or curiosity. That's love. And you'd be an idiot to throw it away because other people are too small-minded to understand it. But the damage was already spreading beyond their immediate circles." Chloe came home from school that afternoon with tears in her eyes and a story that made Tom's protective instincts flare with anger. "Some of the kids were saying mean things about you and Princess Alexandra," she reported, climbing into his lap for comfort. "They said she was only pretending to like us because rich people do that sometimes, and that she was going to leave us when she got bored." Tom held his daughter while she cried out her confusion and hurt, realizing that their relationship had inadvertently made her a target for the kind of cruelty that children could inflict when they repeated their parents' prejudices. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Tom asked gently. "Do you think Alexandra is pretending to care about us?" Chloe considered the question with the seriousness she brought to important decisions. "No, Daddy. She looks at us the same way Mommy used. Like we're the most important people in the world. You can't fake that." Out of the mouths of babes, Tom thought, but her innocent wisdom didn't entirely erase his growing concerns about the complications their relationship was bringing to all their lives. That evening, Alexandra appeared at their door with Chinese takeout and an expression that suggested she had been wrestling with her own version of the same doubts. "I'm sorry about the article," she said as Tom let her into the apartment. "I had hoped we could keep our privacy a little longer." "It's not your fault," Tom replied, though his tone carried a weariness that hadn't been there the week before. Chloe emerged from her bedroom, still showing the effects of her difficult day at school, but she brightened immediately upon seeing Alexandra. "Princess Alexandra, did you see the newspaper? We're famous." "I saw it," Alexandra said, kneeling down to give Chloe a hug that lasted longer than usual. "Are you okay with people knowing about us?" "I'm proud that you're our friend," Chloe replied with the directness that had become familiar. "But some kids were mean about it today. They said rich people and poor people can't really be friends." Alexandra's expression hardened with anger at the thought of anyone hurting Chloe, but her voice remained gentle. "What do you think about that?" "I think they're wrong," Chloe said firmly. "Friendship isn't about money. It's about caring about each other and having fun together. You care about us, and we care about you, so we're real friends, no matter what anyone else says." Over dinner, they talked about the practical implications of increased public attention. Alexandra had already received several calls from clients, expressing concern about her image and its potential impact on their business relationship. While none had terminated their contracts, the message was clear. continued scrutiny of her personal life could affect her professional standing. Tom, meanwhile, had been dealing with speculation from neighbors and co-workers about his motivations for dating someone so far above his economic status. The suggestion that he was either a gold digger or Alexandra's charity project stung more than he wanted to admit. "Maybe we should take a step back," Tom said carefully, after Chloe had gone to bed and they were cleaning up the dinner dishes. "Let things cool down for a while." Alexandra's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Is that what you want?" "I want what's best for all of us," Tom replied. But his avoidance of a direct answer spoke volumes. "Including you. Your career shouldn't suffer because of gossip about your personal life." "My career will survive," Alexandra said firmly. "The question is whether we will." They stood in the small kitchen, separated by only a few feet, but suddenly feeling much farther apart as they each contemplated the pressures that were testing their relationship before it had time to fully develop. "I love you," Alexandra said suddenly, the words coming out in a rush before she could second-guess herself. "I know it's complicated and inconvenient and probably crazy, but I love you and Chloe, and I don't want to lose what we have because other people can't understand it." Tom's expression softened as he heard the first declaration of love either of them had made. "I love you too," he said quietly. "That's what makes this so hard. I want to protect you from all of this, but I also want to be selfish and keep you in our lives." "Then let's be selfish," Alexandra replied, moving closer to him. "Let's decide what we want and fight for it, instead of letting other people's opinions make our decisions for us." The Society Chronicle article appeared on Saturday morning with a headline that made Alexandra's heart sink: "CEO's charity case, love or publicity stunt." The piece itself wasn't cruel, but it painted their relationship in terms that reduced Tom to a curiosity and Alexandra to either a saint or a social climber, depending on the reader's perspective. The article included photographs from the elementary school art show and quotes from unnamed sources speculating about Alexandra's motivations for dating significantly beneath her social status. While it mentioned Tom's character and devotion to his daughter, the overall tone suggested that their relationship was noteworthy, primarily because of how unusual it was for someone of Alexandra's position to be involved with a working-class single father. Alexandra was in her kitchen, staring at the newspaper over her untouched coffee, when her phone began ringing with calls from friends, business associates, and relatives she hadn't spoken to in months. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: surprise, curiosity, and barely concealed judgment about her choice in romantic partners. "I had no idea you were seeing someone," said her college roommate during the third call of the morning. "Is it serious, or are you just trying to make a statement about social consciousness?" The assumption that her relationship with Tom could only be explained as either charity work or political posturing hurt more than Alexandra had expected. She found herself defending not just Tom's character, but her own capacity for genuine emotion. Meanwhile, 15 miles away, Tom was dealing with his own version of the same scrutiny. His co-workers at the construction site had seen the article, and their reactions ranged from good-natured ribbing to poorly concealed resentment. "So you're the guy dating the rich lady," said Jake Morrison, the same colleague who had made snide remarks weeks earlier. "Must be nice to have someone who can solve all your financial problems." "It's not like that," Tom replied quietly, but he could see that his denials only fueled more speculation about his motivations. Ben appeared at his elbow during lunch break, offering the kind of steady support that had gotten Tom through the worst days after Sarah's death. "Don't let them get to you. People always assume the worst when they can't understand something." "Maybe they have a point," Tom said, voicing the doubts that had been growing since the article's publication. "Maybe I am taking advantage of her kindness, letting Chloe get attached to someone who's eventually going to realize this was all a mistake." "You know that's not true," Ben replied firmly. "I've seen the way she looks at you and Chloe. That's not charity or curiosity, that's love. and you'd be an idiot to throw it away because other people are too small-minded to understand it. But the damage was already spreading beyond their immediate circles. Chloe came home from school that afternoon with tears in her eyes and a story that made Tom's protective instincts flare with anger. Some of the kids were saying mean things about you and Princess Alexandra, she reported, climbing into his lap for comfort. They said she was only pretending to like us because rich people do that sometimes, and that she was going to leave us when she got bored. Tom held his daughter while she cried out her confusion and hurt, realizing that their relationship had inadvertently made her a target for the kind of cruelty that children could inflict when they repeated their parents' prejudices. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Tom asked gently. "Do you think Alexandra is pretending to care about us?" Chloe considered the question with the seriousness she brought to important decisions. "No, Daddy. She looks at us the same way Mommy used. Like we're the most important people in the world. You can't fake that." Out of the mouths of babes, Tom thought, but her innocent wisdom didn't entirely erase his growing concerns about the complications their relationship was bringing to all their lives. That evening, Alexandra appeared at their door with Chinese takeout and an expression that suggested she had been wrestling with her own version of the same doubts. "I'm sorry about the article," she said, as Tom let her into the apartment. "I had hoped we could keep our privacy a little longer." "It's not your fault," Tom replied, though his tone carried a weariness that hadn't been there the week before. Chloe emerged from her bedroom, still showing the effects of her difficult day at school, but she brightened immediately upon seeing Alexandra. "Princess Alexandra, did you see the newspaper? We're famous." "I saw it," Alexandra said, kneeling down to give Chloe a hug that lasted longer than usual. "Are you okay with people knowing about us?" "I'm proud that you're our friend," Chloe replied with the directness that had become familiar. "But some kids were mean about it today. They said rich people and poor people can't really be friends." Alexandra's expression hardened with anger at the thought of anyone hurting Chloe, but her voice remained gentle. "What do you think about that?" "I think they're wrong," Chloe said firmly. "Friendship isn't about money. It's about caring about each other and having fun together. You care about us, and we care about you, so we're real friends, no matter what anyone else says." Over dinner, they talked about the practical implications of increased public attention. Alexandra had already received several calls from clients, expressing concern about her image and its potential impact on their business relationship. While none had terminated their contracts, the message was clear. Continued scrutiny of her personal life could affect her professional standing. Tom, meanwhile, had been dealing with speculation from neighbors and co-workers about his motivations for dating someone so far above his economic status. The suggestion that he was either a gold digger or Alexandra's charity project stung more than he wanted to admit. "Maybe we should take a step back," Tom said carefully, after Chloe had gone to bed and they were cleaning up the dinner dishes. "Let things cool down for a while." Alexandra's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Is that what you want?" "I want what's best for all of us," Tom replied, but his avoidance of a direct answer spoke volumes. "Including you. Your career shouldn't suffer because of gossip about your personal life." "My career will survive," Alexandra said firmly. "The question is whether we will." They stood in the small kitchen, separated by only a few feet, but suddenly feeling much farther apart, as they each contemplated the pressures that were testing their relationship before it had time to fully develop. "I love you," Alexandra said suddenly, the words coming out in a rush before she could second-guess herself. "I know it's complicated and inconvenient and probably crazy, but I love you and Chloe, and I don't want to lose what we have because other people can't understand it." Tom's expression softened as he heard the first declaration of love either of them had made. "I love you too," he said quietly. "That's what makes this so hard. I want to protect you from all of this, but I also want to be selfish and keep you in our lives." "Then let's be selfish," Alexandra replied, moving closer to him. Let's decide what we want and fight for it, instead of letting other people's opinions make our decisions for us. The conversation continued late into the evening, with both of them acknowledging the challenges they faced, while refusing to let external pressures destroy what they had built together. But even as they made promises to weather the storm of public scrutiny, they could both feel the strain that constant judgment was placing on their relationship. The next few days brought a corporate crisis that would test Alexandra's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. Stephenson Global was in the final stages of negotiating a major merger that would expand the company's international presence, but the deal's primary investor expressed concerns about Alexandra's recent publicity and its potential impact on the company's reputation. We're not saying personal relationships are off limits, the investor explained during an emergency conference call. We're simply concerned about the message this sends to our international clients who may have different expectations about executive behavior. The message was clear. Alexandra's relationship with Tom was being viewed as a liability that could cost the company millions in lost business. As she sat in her office after the call, surrounded by the awards and achievements that had once seemed so important, Alexandra found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about success and happiness. That same day, Tom received news that would complicate their situation even further. The construction company had been awarded a major contract that would provide steady work for the next 18 months, but the project supervisor had made it clear that Tom's recent celebrity status was creating unwanted attention for the company. Nothing personal, Stone, the supervisor explained, but we can't have reporters showing up at job sites asking about your love life. It's distracting for the crew and bad for business. The implicit message was that Tom would need to choose between his relationship with Alexandra and his career. Stability. As he drove home that evening, Tom found himself contemplating a future where loving Alexandra might mean sacrificing his ability to provide for Chloe. That night, as they tucked Chloe into bed together, the little girl sensed the tension between the adults and asked the question they had been avoiding. Are you going to stop being together because people are being mean? She asked with the directness that had become her trademark. Tom and Alexandra exchanged glances, both of them struggling to find words that would reassure a child without making promises they weren't certain they could keep. We're trying to figure out how to make this work, Alexandra said finally. Sometimes grown-up problems are complicated, but that doesn't mean we stop caring about each other. Good, Chloe said with satisfaction, because I already picked out my flower girl dress in my head, and I don't want to have to change my mind about it. The innocent assumption that they would eventually marry hung in the air after Chloe fell asleep, a reminder of the dreams and expectations they had created not just for themselves, but for the little girl who had come to depend on their happiness for her own sense of security. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who required Tom's personal signature and seemed far too formal for their modest apartment building. Tom examined the heavy cream paper with gold embossing that identified the law firm of Morrison, Blackwell and Associates, a name that meant nothing to him, but carried the weight of established money and old family connections. Inside, he found documents that would change everything he thought he knew about his own life and financial circumstances. Mr. Stone, the letter began in the careful language of legal correspondence. We are writing to inform you of a trust established by your maternal grandparents, Robert and Eleanor Patterson, which has now reached maturity according to the terms outlined in their 1987 estate planning documents. Tom sat at his small kitchen table, reading and rereading the letter as its implications slowly sank in. His grandparents, whom he had barely known after his mother's early death, had established a substantial trust fund that had been growing for over 2 decades. The original amount had been modest, but careful investment and compound interest had transformed it into a sum that would eliminate all his financial concerns and provide security for Chloe's entire future. The letter explained that the trust had been designed to mature when Tom reached 35, or in the event of significant life changes, such as marriage or the need to support a dependent child. His grandparents had apparently wanted to ensure that their grandson would have resources available during the most challenging years of building a family and career, but only after he had proven himself capable of independent responsibility. Tom's hands trembled as he examined the financial statements that accompanied the letter. The trust contained enough money to pay off every debt he had ever accumulated, buy a house in the best neighborhood, ensure Chloe's college education, and still leave substantial savings for emergencies and future opportunities. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. According to the documentation, Tom had been receiving notices about the trust for several years, but they had been sent to addresses where he no longer lived. The law firm had finally tracked him down through employment records and public documents, but his delayed awareness meant that he had been living in modest circumstances by choice rather than necessity for nearly 3 years. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. All the times he had worried about making rent, all the sacrifices he had made to provide for Chloe, all the careful budgeting and extra shifts, none of it had been strictly necessary. He could have given his daughter a completely different life, with better opportunities and fewer struggles. But as the initial shock faded, Tom found himself grappling with more complex emotions. The money would solve his practical problems, but it would also fundamentally change his relationship with Alexandra in ways that made him deeply uncomfortable. Their entire connection had been built on the assumption of their different social positions. She had been the successful CEO willing to love someone below her station, while he had been the noble working man who valued character over wealth. If he was actually as financially secure as she was, what did that say about the authenticity of their relationship? More troubling still was the question of why he had never mentioned the trust to Alexandra. The simple answer was that he hadn't known about it. But the more complex truth was that he had never bothered to track down the various legal notices and official correspondence that most adults handled as a matter of course. His focus on immediate survival and daily responsibilities had blinded him to the larger financial picture. Tom spent the rest of the morning reviewing the trust documents and trying to process their implications. The money had always been there, waiting for him to claim it, but his choices about how to live had been based on incomplete information about his actual circumstances. By noon, he had made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for all of them. He called the law firm and arranged to meet with the estate attorney that afternoon, determined to understand exactly what resources had been available to him and why he had never received the earlier notifications. The law office occupied 3 floors of a prestigious downtown building, with the kind of understated luxury that spoke of old money and established connections. Tom felt decidedly out of place in his work clothes, but the receptionist treated him with the deference due to someone who controlled a substantial trust fund. Mr. Morrison, a distinguished man in his 60s who moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to handling large sums of other people's money, explained the situation with professional courtesy and barely concealed curiosity about Tom's delayed response to their communications. Your grandparents were quite specific about their intentions, Morrison explained, reviewing the original trust documents. They had observed the challenges that sudden wealth could create for young people, so they designed this to activate during your most financially challenging years. The assumption was that you would be starting a family, buying a home, perhaps facing the costs of higher education or career development. Why didn't I receive the earlier notices? Tom asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. We sent them to the addresses we had on file. Your apartment on 5th Street, then the place on Riverside Drive. When those were returned as undeliverable, we tried to reach you through emergency contacts, but the phone numbers had been disconnected. Tom recognized the addresses as places he had lived during the darkest period after Sarah's death, when he had moved frequently and avoided anything that resembled official correspondence. His grief and focus on basic survival had caused him to miss communications that could have changed everything. The irony, Morrison continued with the dry observation of someone who had witnessed numerous family financial dramas, is that you've been living exactly as your grandparents hoped you would, working hard, taking care of your family, building character through facing challenges. They would have been quite proud of the man you've become, even without their financial support. Tom left the law office with documents that would give him access to more money than he had ever imagined possessing, but he felt more confused than relieved. The trust would solve his immediate problems and secure Chloe's future, but it would also fundamentally alter his relationship with Alexandra in ways he couldn't predict. That evening, while Chloe worked on homework and chatted about her day at school, Tom found himself studying her with new eyes. He could give her private school, ballet lessons with the best instructors, travel opportunities, and all the experiences that money could provide, but he could also see that she was genuinely happy with their simple life, that the modest pleasures they shared had created a foundation of contentment that might be disrupted by sudden wealth. The decision about whether to tell Alexandra immediately or wait until he had processed the implications himself became irrelevant when she arrived unexpectedly that evening with takeout dinner and news of her own business crisis. "I may need to step back from the merger negotiations," she announced as they set up dinner on the small kitchen table. "The investors are concerned about my personal choices, affecting the company's reputation." Tom felt the bitter irony of the situation. Here was Alexandra potentially sacrificing career opportunities because of their relationship, while he was sitting on information that would completely reframe their entire dynamic. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, the words coming out more abruptly than he had planned. Alexandra looked up from serving Chloe's portion, immediately recognizing the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" Tom pulled out the legal documents, spreading them on the table between the Chinese food containers. "I received these today. It turns out my grandparents left me a trust fund that I never knew about." "A substantial one." Alexandra's expression shifted from concern to confusion as she scanned the financial statements. "I don't understand. You mean you've had access to this money all along?" "No, yes, it's complicated." Tom struggled to explain the circumstances that had led to his delayed awareness of the trust. "I never received the notices because I moved around a lot after Sarah died. By the time they tracked me down, the trust had been growing for years." The full conversation that followed was one of the most difficult they had ever had. Alexandra felt deceived, not because Tom had intentionally hidden anything, but because their entire relationship had been built on assumptions about their different financial circumstances that were apparently false. "So when you were worried about paying rent, when you were working 2 jobs, when you couldn't afford to take Chloe to the zoo, all of that was unnecessary?" Alexandra asked, her voice carefully controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of hurt and confusion. "I didn't know," Tom repeated, but he could see how inadequate that explanation sounded. "I was focused on day-to-day survival. I didn't follow up on official mail or track down missing communications. But this changes everything," Alexandra said quietly. "Our entire relationship has been about me accepting your circumstances, about love transcending class differences. If those differences don't actually exist—" "They do exist," Tom interrupted. "The money doesn't change who I am or how I was raised. It doesn't erase years of struggling to make ends meet or the values that shaped how I parent Chloe." But even as he made the argument, Tom could see the validity of Alexandra's confusion. Their relationship had indeed been built partly on the assumption of her financial superiority and his noble acceptance of economic challenges. If he was actually As wealthy as she was, what did that say about the authenticity of their connection? The evening deteriorated from there, with both of them struggling to process how this revelation affected their feelings for each other and their plans for the future. Chloe, sensing the tension between the adults, tried to lighten the mood with stories from school, but her efforts only highlighted how much their family dynamic might change if they suddenly had unlimited financial resources. After Alexandra left that night, earlier than usual, and without their customary planning for the next time they would see each other, Tom sat in his living room, surrounded by legal documents and takeout containers, wondering if newfound wealth was going to cost him the love he had finally allowed himself to feel again. The next few days passed in a haze of careful politeness that fooled no one. Alexandra threw herself into her work with renewed intensity, using the merger negotiations as an excuse to avoid confronting the complex emotions surrounding Tom's revelation. Tom, meanwhile, found himself paralyzed by the decision of whether to access the trust funds immediately or wait until he and Alexandra had resolved the relationship questions that the money had created. It was Chloe who finally forced the issue, approaching Tom on Thursday evening with the directness that had become her trademark for cutting through adult complications. "Are you and Princess Alexandra going to break up because of the money?" she asked, climbing into his lap for the serious conversations that had become their routine. "Why would you think that, sweetheart? Because you both seem sad now, and you keep looking at those papers like they say something terrible instead of something good." Tom realized that his 8-year-old daughter had identified the core issue that he and Alexandra had been dancing around. The money should have been good news. It meant security, opportunity, and freedom from financial worry. But instead, it had created doubt about the authenticity of their relationship and confusion about their future together. "The money means we could do a lot of things we couldn't do before," Tom explained carefully. "But it also means that some things about our family might change, and change can be scary even when it's good. Will you still be my daddy? And will Alexandra still want to be like my mom?" The simplicity of her question cut through all the complex emotions and social implications that had been troubling the adults. At its core, their family was about love and commitment, not financial compatibility or social expectations. That night, Tom made a decision that would determine whether their relationship could survive this unexpected revelation. He called Alexandra and asked if she would meet him the next evening, not at either of their homes, but at the place where they had first danced together, the ballroom of the Riverside Hotel. "I have something to show you," he said, "and I think it needs to happen." Where this all began, the Riverside Hotel ballroom looked different on a Friday evening without the elaborate decorations and hundreds of elegantly dressed guests. The space that had been transformed into a fairy tale setting for the charity gala now showed its everyday grandeur, still beautiful, but more intimate and somehow more honest in its simplicity. Tom arrived first, carrying a manila envelope that contained copies of all the trust documents, as well as something else that he hoped would help Alexandra understand his decision about their future together. He had spent considerable time that afternoon with his lawyer and financial advisor, making choices that would affect not just his own life, but the lives of every person who mattered to him. The ballroom's manager had been puzzled by Tom's request to rent the space for a private meeting, but the substantial deposit paid from Tom's newly accessible trust fund had overcome any hesitation about the unusual arrangement. Now standing in the center of the dance floor, where he and Alexandra had first connected, Tom felt the weight of all the decisions that had led them to this moment. Alexandra appeared in the doorway at exactly 7 o'clock, wearing a simple black dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. Her expression was guarded but curious as she took in the empty ballroom and Tom's formal attire. He had chosen to wear his father's vintage tuxedo, the same one he would later wear to their wedding, though neither of them knew that yet. This is dramatic, even for you, Alexandra said with a slight smile that didn't quite hide her nervousness about what this meeting might reveal. I wanted to bring us back to where it all started, Tom replied, gesturing to the space around them. Before we had complicated expectations and social pressures and financial revelations that neither of us handled very well. They stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by memories of their first dance and all the possibilities that had seemed so simple before the world intruded on their private happiness. I've been thinking about what the money means, Tom began, pulling the manila envelope from his jacket pocket. Not just for us, but for Chloe, for the kind of life we want to build together, and for whether love is really strong enough to survive this kind of fundamental change in our circumstances. Alexandra remained silent, watching his face for clues about where this conversation was leading. The truth is, you were right to feel deceived, Tom continued. Not because I intentionally hid anything, but because our entire relationship has been built on assumptions that turned out to be false. You thought you were dating a struggling single father, and I thought I was being loved despite my financial limitations. Both of those things shaped how we saw ourselves and each other. So, what do we do with that? Alexandra asked quietly. Tom opened the envelope and withdrew a document that he handed to her with hands that trembled slightly despite his determination to remain calm. This is what I've decided to do with the trust fund. Alexandra scanned the legal paperwork, her expression changing from confusion to amazement as she realized what she was reading. You're establishing a foundation for single parents. The Stone Family Foundation, Tom confirmed. The entire trust fund, except for what I'm setting aside for Chloe's education and a modest emergency fund for our family. I want to use the money to help other single parents achieve stability and opportunity for their children. The foundation documents outlined a comprehensive program that would provide financial assistance, career training, childcare support, and educational opportunities for single-parent families facing the same challenges that Tom had navigated for years. This is incredible, Tom. But why are you giving away your financial security? The money could solve so many problems for your own family. Because I realized that the money was never really mine, Tom replied, his voice gaining strength as he explained the decision that had clarified everything for him. It was always meant to help people build better lives for their families. My grandparents wanted to ensure that their resources would make a positive difference, and this feels like honoring their intentions in the most meaningful way possible. Alexandra continued reading through the foundation documents, noting the careful attention to detail and the comprehensive approach to addressing systemic challenges facing single parents. Besides, Tom added with a smile that reminded her of why she had fallen in love with him, I've already proven that I can support my family through my own work. The foundation will employ both of us. You as the executive director and strategic planner, me as the program coordinator and community outreach manager, if you're interested in building something meaningful together. You want me to leave Stephenson Global to run a non-profit foundation? I want us to create something that matters more than quarterly profits or social status. I want Chloe to grow up seeing that success is measured by how much good you can do for other people, not how much wealth you can accumulate for yourself. The offer represented everything Alexandra had been unknowingly searching for: meaningful work that would utilize her business skills while serving a purpose larger than personal advancement, and the opportunity to build a life with Tom that was based on shared values rather than financial compatibility. But it also required her to make the same kind of leap of faith that Tom was making by giving away his inheritance. What if this doesn't work? Alexandra asked, voicing the practical concerns that had governed most of her major life decisions. What if we're not suited for non-profit work? Or what if the foundation doesn't succeed? Or what if we destroy our relationship by trying to work together? Then we'll figure it out as we go, Tom replied, with the kind of simple confidence that had first attracted her to him. "But I'd rather risk failing at something meaningful than succeed at something that doesn't matter." The conversation continued for another hour as they walked through the details of Tom's proposal. The foundation would be headquartered in their community, serving families in the neighborhoods where they had built their own life together. Alexandra's business expertise would be essential for ensuring the organization's sustainability and effectiveness, while Tom's personal experience would guide the development of programs that addressed real needs rather than theoretical problems. But beneath the practical planning was a more fundamental question about what kind of life they wanted to build together and what values they wanted to model for Chloe. "There's something else," Tom said, as their conversation wound down. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that made Alexandra's breath catch with sudden understanding. "I know this isn't the most romantic setting," Tom began, dropping to one knee in the center of the ballroom where they had first danced together. "And I know we still have a lot to figure out about merging our lives and our careers and our dreams for the future. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life building something meaningful with you." The ring was perfect in its simplicity, a classic solitaire that sparkled under the ballroom's chandeliers but didn't overwhelm with unnecessary ostentation. It was clearly expensive, but chosen for beauty and meaning rather than as a display of wealth. "Alexandra Stephenson," Tom continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was asking, "will you marry me? Will you help me raise Chloe as your own daughter? Will you build the Stone family foundation with me and show the world that the best partnerships are built on love, respect, and shared commitment to making life better for other people?" Alexandra's answer came without hesitation, despite all the practical complications and social expectations that she was choosing to abandon. "Yes," she said, kneeling down to meet Tom at eye level. "Yes to all of it. Yes to building something meaningful together. Yes to being Chloe's mom. Yes to taking the biggest, most beautiful risk of my entire life." The kiss that followed was witnessed only by the empty ballroom, but it felt like a promise that would reshape everything about how they understood love, success, and the kind of legacy they wanted to create together. When they finally stood up, still holding each other close, Alexandra realized that Tom had managed to solve every problem that had been troubling their relationship. The trust fund revelation had threatened their connection because it suggested their love was based on false premises. But Tom's decision to donate the money to help other families had reaffirmed the values that had brought them together. "In the first place, how did you know this was exactly what I needed?" Alexandra asked, still trying to process the magnitude of the life change she had just agreed to. "Because it's exactly what we both needed," Tom replied. "A way to use our different skills and experiences to build something that neither of us could create alone." They spent another hour in the ballroom, making plans for their wedding, their future work together, and the conversation they would need to have with Chloe about the major changes coming to their family. The little girl who had brought them together would now watch them build a foundation dedicated to helping other children have the stability and opportunities that every family deserved. As they prepared to leave the ballroom where their love story had begun, Alexandra realized that Tom had given her something more valuable than financial security or social status. He had given her a purpose that would make every day meaningful, and a partner who understood that true wealth came from the love you shared and the good you could do for others. The announcement of their engagement would surprise many people, but the establishment of the Stone Family Foundation would surprise them even more. Together, they were about to prove that the most powerful love stories weren't about overcoming differences, but about using those differences to create something beautiful and meaningful that neither person could have achieved alone. The ballroom. Lights dimmed as they walked toward the door, but the future they had planned together had never looked brighter. Exactly 1 year after their first dance, The Riverside Hotel ballroom was once again filled with elegantly dressed guests for the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. But this time, Tom Stone stood in the crowd wearing his father's impeccably tailored vintage tuxedo, no longer a server watching from the sidelines, but an invited guest whose presence represented a transformation that few people had seen coming. The tuxedo had been a revelation when Tom finally had it properly fitted. Made in 1952 for his father's wedding, the jacket and trousers had been crafted with the attention to detail that marked the work of master tailors from an earlier era. The midnight blue fabric had aged to perfection, and the classic cut emphasized Tom's broad shoulders and tall frame in a way that made him appear every bit as distinguished as the wealth-born men around him. Chloe stood beside him in a dress that Alexandra had helped her choose, navy blue with silver stars that complemented Tom's formal wear, while still being appropriate for a 9-year-old's sense of style and movement. Her hair was arranged in an elegant updo that made her look older and more sophisticated, though her excited smile and bright eyes remained purely childlike. "Do you see Princess Alexandra yet, Daddy?" Chloe asked, rising on her toes to scan the crowd for their guest of honor. "She'll be here soon, sweetheart," Tom replied, though he was searching for Alexandra as eagerly as his daughter was. The past year had brought changes that neither Tom nor Alexandra could have imagined when they first walked into this ballroom. Together, the Stone Family Foundation had officially launched 6 months earlier with an inaugural event that drew support from across the city's philanthropic community. Alexandra had indeed left Stephenson Global to serve as the foundation's executive director, a decision that had surprised many, but earned her more respect than criticism from colleagues who recognized her commitment to meaningful work. Tom's role as program coordinator had proven to be perfectly suited to his combination of personal experience, practical skills, and natural leadership abilities. He worked directly with single-parent families, helping them access resources, develop career plans, and navigate the complex systems that often stood between struggling parents and the support they needed. Together, they had created something that was already making measurable differences in dozens of families' lives, with expansion plans that would extend their reach across the region within 2 years. But tonight's gala represented more than just professional success. It was the formal introduction of Tom and Chloe to the social world that had once seemed so foreign and intimidating. Alexandra had been invited to serve as this year's honorary chairwoman, a position that came with both recognition and responsibility for the evening's success. The invitation had extended to Tom as her fiancé and to Chloe as their family's representative, marking their official acceptance into a community that had once viewed them as curiosities rather than peers. Exactly 1 year after their first dance, the Riverside Hotel ballroom was once again filled with elegantly dressed guests for the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala, but this time, Tom Stone stood in the crowd wearing his father's impeccably tailored vintage tuxedo, no longer a server watching from the sidelines, but an invited guest whose presence represented a transformation that few people had seen coming. The tuxedo had been a revelation when Tom finally had it properly fitted. Made in 1952 for his father's wedding, the jacket and trousers had been crafted with the attention to detail that marked the work of master tailors from an earlier era. The midnight blue fabric had aged to perfection, and the classic cut emphasized Tom's broad shoulders and tall frame in a way that made him appear every bit as distinguished as the wealth-born men around him. Chloe stood beside him in a dress that Alexandra had helped her choose, navy blue with silver stars that complemented Tom's formal wear while still being appropriate for a 9-year-old's sense of style and movement. Her hair was arranged in an elegant updo that made her look older and more sophisticated, though her excited smile and bright eyes remained purely childlike. "Do you see Princess Alexandra yet, Daddy?" Chloe asked, rising on her toes to scan the crowd for their guest of honor. "She'll be here soon, sweetheart," Tom replied, though he was searching for Alexandra as eagerly as his daughter was. The past year had brought changes that neither Tom nor Alexandra could have imagined when they first walked into this ballroom. Together, the Stone Family Foundation had officially launched 6 months earlier with an inaugural event that drew support from across the city's philanthropic community. Alexandra had indeed left Stephenson Global to serve as the foundation's executive director, a decision that had surprised many, but earned her more respect than criticism from colleagues who recognized her commitment to meaningful work. Tom's role as program coordinator had proven to be perfectly suited to his combination of personal experience, practical skills, and natural leadership abilities. He worked directly with single-parent families, helping them access resources, develop career plans, and navigate the complex systems that often stood between struggling parents and the support they needed. Together, they had created something that was already making measurable differences in dozens of families' lives, with expansion plans that would extend their reach across the region within 2 years. But tonight's gala represented more than just professional success. It was the formal introduction of Tom and Chloe to the social world that had once seemed so foreign and intimidating. Alexandra had been invited to serve as this year's honorary chairwoman, a position that came with both recognition and responsibility for the evening's success. The invitation had extended to Tom as her fiancé and to Chloe as their family's representative, marking their official acceptance into a community that had once viewed them as curiosities rather than peers. Ben appeared at Tom's elbow, looking decidedly uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, but grinning with pride at his friend's transformation. "You clean up pretty well for a construction worker," he said with the easy familiarity that had sustained their friendship through all the changes of the past year. "Former construction worker," Tom corrected with a smile. "Foundation program coordinator now, remember?" "Right. And how's that working out for you? Missing the honest work yet?" Tom considered the question seriously. "It's different. More meetings, more paperwork, more politics. But when I see a single mom get her GED because we provided childcare during classes, or when a dad finds stable employment because we connected him with job training, that's worth all the meetings in the world." Ben nodded with understanding. He had watched Tom struggle through the darkest period after Sarah's death, and he had seen the gradual return of purpose and joy that had accompanied Tom's relationship with Alexandra and their shared work at the foundation. "Speaking of which," Ben said, nodding toward the ballroom entrance, "your princess has arrived." Alexandra appeared in the doorway like something from a classic Hollywood movie, wearing an emerald green gown that brought out her eyes, and moved with liquid grace as she made her way through the crowd. But what struck Tom most wasn't her elegant appearance. It was the confidence and genuine warmth with which she engaged everyone she met, from major donors to volunteer coordinators to the hotel staff managing the evening's logistics. She had grown into her role as a philanthropic leader with the same natural authority she had brought to corporate management. But there was something softer about her now, an accessibility that hadn't been present during her years focused purely on business. Success. "Daddy, she's even more beautiful than last year," Chloe whispered, with the kind of awe that suggested she still couldn't quite believe that such an elegant person was about to become her official mother. Alexandra spotted them across the room, and her face lit up with the kind of unguarded joy that still surprised Tom with its intensity. She made her way toward them, pausing to acknowledge greetings and accept congratulations on the foundation's success, but never losing sight of her destination. "There's my family," she said when she finally reached them, accepting Chloe's enthusiastic hug and Tom's kiss with the natural ease of someone who had found exactly where she belonged. "You look stunning," Tom said, meaning it completely. "And the speech you're going to give tonight? Memorized and terrifying," Alexandra admitted. But Chloe helped me practice, so I think I'm ready. The evening's program began with cocktails and networking, giving Alexandra the opportunity to introduce Tom and Chloe to colleagues and donors who had heard about the foundation's work but hadn't met the family behind it. The responses were universally positive, with several major contributors expressing interest in expanding their support for the foundation's programs. As the formal program concluded and the orchestra began tuning their instruments for the evening's dancing, Tom felt his heart rate increase with anticipation and nerves. He had been planning this moment for months, coordinating with the event. Organizers, the musicians, and even Chloe, who had been practicing her role as the secret keeper of the family's most important surprise. Alexandra was still accepting congratulations on her speech when the orchestra leader approached the microphone with an announcement that wasn't listed in the evening's official program. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin tonight's dancing, we have a special request from one of our guests. Mr. Tom Stone has asked us to recreate a particular moment from last year's gala, and we're delighted to accommodate him. Alexandra turned to look at Tom with surprise and growing understanding as he stepped forward, extending his hand with the same careful courtesy he had shown during their first dance together. "If I remember correctly," Tom said, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet ballroom, "you once said that if someone could dance a particular waltz, they could claim you for the evening." The crowd murmured with recognition and delight, as they realized they were about to witness the recreation of the moment that had become legendary among the city's social circles. But this time, instead of wealthy suitors lining up to compete for Alexandra's attention, there was only Tom, confident and elegant in his father's tuxedo, and Chloe, beaming with excitement at being part of such an important moment. "I believe I proved my dancing abilities last year," Tom continued, "but tonight I'd like to make a different kind of claim, if you're willing." The orchestra began the opening notes of the same Chopin waltz that had brought them together, but as Tom and Alexandra moved onto the dance floor with Chloe between them, it was clear that this wasn't simply a nostalgic recreation of their first meeting. They danced with the easy confidence that came from a year of shared experiences, challenges overcome, and love that had deepened through both joy and difficulty. Tom's leading was sure and gentle, Alexandra's following was trusting and graceful, and Chloe moved between them with the natural rhythm that came from being truly loved and secure. But as the waltz reached its crescendo, Tom surprised everyone by stopping in the center of the dance floor and dropping to one knee, pulling out a ring that sparkled under the ballroom's crystal chandeliers. "Alexandra Stephenson," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment and the audience of hundreds watching in delighted silence. "You've already said yes to marrying me, and yes to being Chloe's mother, and yes to building something meaningful together. But tonight, in front of everyone who matters to us, I want to ask you one more time. Will you be my wife and my partner in everything that matters for the rest of our lives?" Alexandra's answer came through tears of joy that she didn't bother to hide. "Yes," she said, kneeling down to meet Tom at eye level, while Chloe bounced with excitement beside them. "Yes to all of it, forever and always." The kiss that followed was witnessed by a ballroom full of people who erupted in applause that was warmer and more genuine than any response the evening had yet produced. But Tom and Alexandra were aware only of each other, and of Chloe's delighted laughter as she threw her arms around both of them in a family embrace that felt like coming home. As they stood up together, still holding each other close, the orchestra resumed the waltz, and other couples began joining them on the dance floor. But for several magical minutes, the three of them danced alone, while the crowd watched and smiled at the obvious love and joy that radiated from their small family unit. "How long have you been planning this?" Alexandra asked as they swayed together to the music. "Since the day I first proposed," Tom admitted. "I wanted to give you a public declaration that matched the private one, something that would let everyone know how proud I am to love you and be loved by you." "And I helped," Chloe added, with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully kept an important secret. "I knew about the ring and everything, and I didn't tell even when you were trying on wedding dresses." The mention of wedding dresses brought Alexandra's attention to a detail she had missed in her surprise and emotion. "Chloe, you're wearing the exact dress you described as your flower girl dress." "Because I am going to be your flower girl," Chloe replied with 9-year-old logic. "Daddy said we could have the wedding next month if you want to, and I've already picked out everything I want to wear, and what flowers I want to carry, and what songs the band should play." Alexandra looked at Tom with amazement. "Next month? If you want to wait longer, we can," Tom said quickly. "But we've already been engaged for 6 months. We're already living together, and we're already working together every day." Chloe's right that she has very specific ideas about the wedding, and honestly, I'm ready to make it official whenever you are. The conversation continued as they danced, with Tom explaining the plans he had been making with Chloe's enthusiastic input. The wedding would be held in the small church in their neighborhood, with a reception in the community center where they had held many foundation events. The guest list would include everyone who had supported their relationship and their work, from Ben and the neighbors who had watched their love story unfold, to the donors and volunteers who had helped make the foundation successful. "It sounds perfect," Alexandra said, meaning it completely. "Simple and meaningful and surrounded by people who matter to us." As the evening continued, they found themselves surrounded by well-wishers and supporters who were genuinely happy about their engagement and excited about their upcoming wedding. Several couples requested dances with the newly engaged family, and Chloe proved to be a popular partner for the older gentleman who remembered when dancing with children was a standard part of formal events. But the moment that would be remembered by everyone present came near the end of the evening, when Mia, Alexandra's former assistant, who had become a close friend and the foundation's development coordinator, approached them with a surprise announcement. "I have something for the newly engaged couple," she said, presenting them with a large wrapped frame. "It's from all of us who have watched your love story unfold." Inside was a professional photograph taken during their first dance at the previous year's gala, capturing the exact moment when their eyes met and their lives changed forever. But surrounding the central image was a collage of photographs from the past year: the foundation's launch event, Chloe's birthday party, family dinners, and candid shots of them working together on the projects that had become their shared mission. "We wanted you to have a reminder of how far you've come," Mia explained, "and how many people you've inspired along the way." Alexandra studied the collage with tears in her eyes, seeing their relationship documented not just as a romantic story, but as a partnership that had created something meaningful and lasting. The photographs showed them not just as lovers, but as colleagues, parents, and community leaders who had used their different strengths to build something neither could have achieved alone. "This is beautiful," she said, hugging Mia with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for documenting our journey." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Tom, Alexandra, and Chloe found themselves alone in the ballroom where their story had begun. The space looked different now, not just because they were seeing it through different eyes, but because they had earned their place in it through a year of hard work, authentic love, and commitment to something larger than their own happiness. "Ready to go home?" Tom asked, offering his arm to his fiancée and his other hand to his daughter. "Ready," Alexandra replied, then paused to look around the ballroom one more time. "But let's come back here for our first anniversary. I want to dance in this room every year and remember how it all started." As they walked toward the exit, Chloe skipping between them with the energy that came from being part of something wonderful, Tom realized that they had achieved something rare and precious, a love that had grown stronger through challenges. a family that had been chosen rather than simply inherited, and a shared purpose that would give meaning to all their days together. The ballroom lights dimmed behind them, but the future they were walking toward had never looked brighter. 6 months later, the small church in Tom's neighborhood was filled with everyone who had played a meaningful role in their love story. The sanctuary, with its simple wooden pews and stained glass windows that cast colored light across the altar, provided the perfect setting for a wedding that emphasized substance over spectacle. Alexandra stood in the church's small preparation room, adjusting the simple but elegant ivory dress she had chosen for its classic beauty rather than elaborate design. The gown moved with natural grace and complemented her auburn hair, which Chloe had helped arrange in a style that managed to be both sophisticated and approachable. "Are you ready, Princess Alexandra?" Chloe asked, appearing in the doorway wearing the navy blue dress with silver stars that she had described months earlier as her perfect flower girl outfit. "I'm ready," Alexandra replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Are you ready to officially become my daughter?" Chloe's face lit up with the joy that had become her trademark expression whenever the topic of their family was discussed. "I've been ready since the first time you danced with us. I knew you were going to be my real mum even before you and Daddy figured it out." The wedding ceremony would include not just the traditional marriage vows between Tom and Alexandra, but also a formal adoption ceremony that would make Chloe legally and officially Alexandra's daughter. The paperwork had been completed weeks earlier, but they had decided to incorporate the adoption into their wedding ceremony as a symbol of the family they were creating together. Margaret Stephenson, Alexandra's mother, knocked gently on the doctor and entered with an expression of pride and happiness that had been growing stronger throughout the wedding planning process. "The guests are all seated, and Tom looks absolutely magnificent in his father's tuxedo," she reported. "I think you're about to have the most beautiful wedding this neighborhood has ever seen." Margaret had initially been concerned about Alexandra's dramatic life changes, leaving her successful career to run a non-profit, moving to a working-class neighborhood, marrying a man from such a different background. But meeting Tom and Chloe had eliminated all her doubts, and watching Alexandra's happiness over the past months had convinced her that her daughter had finally found exactly what she needed. "Your father would have loved Tom," Margaret added, adjusting a small detail of Alexandra's dress. "He always said that character mattered more than credentials, and Tom has the kind of character that would have impressed him greatly." The processional began, with Chloe walking down the aisle, carrying a bouquet of daisies and roses, her steps perfectly timed to the music they had practiced for weeks. She moved with the confidence of a child who knew she was deeply loved and absolutely secure in her place in the family they were creating. Ben followed as Tom's best man, looking proud and slightly emotional as he took his place at the altar. His friendship with Tom had weathered all the changes of the past year, and he had become a trusted advisor and supporter for both the foundation's work and the family's happiness. Mia served as Alexandra's maid of honor, representing not just their professional relationship, but the genuine friendship that had developed through years of working together and months of planning both the foundation and the wedding. But it was the moment when Alexandra appeared at the back of the church, arm in arm with her mother, that brought tears to many eyes in the congregation. She looked radiant in a way that went far beyond physical beauty. There was a completeness and joy in her expression that spoke of someone who had found exactly where she belonged. Tom waited at the altar wearing his father's perfectly tailored vintage tuxedo, his expression a mixture of pride, love, and amazement that this moment had actually arrived. Beside him stood the minister who had known him since childhood and had watched him struggle through grief and single parenthood before finding the love that had transformed his life. The ceremony itself was simple, but deeply moving, with vows they had written themselves that focused on partnership, mutual respect, and shared commitment to building a life of meaning and service. When Tom placed the wedding ring on Alexandra's finger, his hands were steady and his voice was clear. as he promised to love and support her for the rest of their lives. Alexandra's vows brought tears to everyone present as she spoke not just about her love for Tom, but about her gratitude for being welcomed into his and Chloe's family and her excitement about the adventures they would share together. But the most emotional moment came during the adoption ceremony, when Chloe stepped forward to officially become Alexandra's legal daughter. The little girl had prepared her own statement for the occasion, speaking with remarkable composure about how happy she was to have a complete family again. "I know my mommy Sarah is watching from heaven," Chloe said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the small church, "and I think she's happy that Daddy found someone who loves us both so much. Alexandra is going to be the best mom ever, and I'm going to be the best daughter I can be." The adoption was finalized with the same rings and promises that had just united Tom and Alexandra in marriage, creating a legal and emotional bond that would last for the rest of their lives. When the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife and mother and daughter, the kiss that followed was witnessed by a congregation that erupted in joyful applause. But Tom, Alexandra, and Chloe were aware only of each other and of the profound sense of completeness that came from officially becoming the family they had already been in their hearts for months. The reception in the community center was exactly what they had envisioned: informal but elegant, intimate but joyful, filled with people who had supported their relationship and their work from the beginning. The decorations were simple but beautiful, with flowers from local gardens and photographs documenting their journey from that first dance to their wedding day. The first dance as a married couple was, naturally, the same Chopin waltz that had brought them together, but this time they were joined immediately by Chloe, and then by other guests who wanted to share in their celebration. The dance floor filled with couples of all ages, from Ben and Mia, who had discovered their own romantic connection during the wedding planning, to elderly neighbors who had watched Tom raise Chloe and had welcomed Alexandra into their community with open arms. During the reception, several guests spoke about the impact that Tom and Alexandra's relationship had had on their own understanding of love and commitment. The Foundation's board chair talked about how their partnership had inspired others to think differently about social service and community engagement. Zoe Wellington, who had become a genuine friend and supporter, spoke about how watching their relationship had taught her to question her own assumptions about class and compatibility. Her transformation from opponent to advocate had become one of the more surprising aspects of their story, but it was Chloe who provided the evening's most memorable moment when she took the microphone to make her own toast to her new parents. "I want to thank everybody for coming to celebrate our family," she began with the poise of someone much older than 9. "A year and a half ago, it was just me and Daddy, and we were happy, but sometimes we were lonely too. Then Princess Alexandra danced with us and everything got better." She paused to look at Tom and Alexandra with the kind of love that made everyone in the room smile through their tears. "Now we have the best family in the world, and we help other families be happy too through our foundation. I think that's what families are supposed to do: love each other and help other people and make the world a little bit better." The toast concluded with Chloe presenting Tom and Alexandra with her wedding gift, a hand-drawn family portrait that showed all three of them standing in front of the Foundation's offices, surrounded by other families they had helped. The artwork would eventually be framed and displayed in their home as a reminder of what they had built together and why it mattered. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Tom, Alexandra, and Chloe found themselves cleaning up with the same natural teamwork that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. They worked together to pack up decorations and leftover food, chatting about the day's highlights and making plans for their honeymoon, a family trip to visit the national parks that Chloe had been studying in school. "How does it feel to be officially married?" Mia asked as she helped load wedding gifts into Tom's truck. "Like coming home," Alexandra replied without hesitation. "Like everything finally makes sense." Later that night, after Chloe had fallen asleep in her new bedroom in the house they had bought together in the same neighborhood where Tom had raised her, Alexandra and Tom sat on their front porch, looking at the stars and reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if Chloe hadn't insisted on asking you to dance that night?" Tom asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "I think we would have found each other somehow," Alexandra replied. "Maybe not as quickly and maybe not as dramatically, but I believe the best relationships are inevitable. When two people are meant to be together, the universe finds a way to make it happen." They sat in comfortable silence, both of them thinking about the year ahead and the work they would continue to do together through the foundation. The organization was expanding rapidly, with plans to open satellite offices in 3 other cities and launch new programs for job training and affordable housing development. But more than professional success, they were looking forward to the simple pleasures of daily life as a married couple and family. Saturday morning pancakes with Chloe, evening walks through their neighborhood, family movie nights, and all the small moments that would accumulate into a lifetime of shared happiness. "I love you," Alexandra said softly, the words carrying the weight of all the promises they had made to each other. "I love you too," Tom replied, then added with the gentle humor that had been part of their connection from the beginning, "And I promise to keep dancing with you for the rest of our lives." Inside the house, Chloe's wedding program drawing was already hung on the refrigerator next to her other artwork, a child's interpretation of their perfect day that showed 3 smiling figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun, surrounded by friends and family, and hearts drawn in every color of the rainbow. The drawing captured something that all the professional wedding photographs couldn't quite convey: the pure joy of a family that had been created by choice, strengthened by challenges, and bound together by the kind of love that grew deeper with every passing day. As Tom and Alexandra finally went inside to begin their life as a married couple, they carried with them the certainty that they had found something rare and precious. A partnership that made them both better people, a love that had inspired others, and a shared purpose that would give meaning to all their days together. The fairy tale was real, but it was better than any storybook version because it was built on genuine emotion, mutual respect, and the daily choice to put family and community above personal ambition. They had created their own happily ever after, and they were just getting started. Tom found himself engaged in conversations about policy implications and program effectiveness, topics that he had learned to navigate through months of working with Alexandra and the Foundation's board of directors. His personal experience with single parenthood gave weight to his observations about what struggling families really needed, while his natural pragmatism helped translate good intentions into practical solutions. Chloe, meanwhile, charmed everyone she met with her articulate descriptions of the Foundation's work and her obvious pride in her parents' accomplishments. She'd become something of a mascot for the organization, representing the children who benefited when their single parents received support and opportunities. "I think we're going to get 3 new major donors tonight," Alexandra said during a brief private moment with Tom, "and the mayor wants to discuss expanding our job training programs to include city employment opportunities." "That's fantastic," Tom replied, though he could see the slight tension in Alexandra's expression that suggested she was nervous about something beyond the evening's fundraising goals. "There's something else," Alexandra said quietly. "Zar Wellington is here tonight. She asked specifically to speak with both of us." Tom's expression tightened slightly. Zar had been the primary source of opposition to their relationship during its early months, and while she had publicly apologized for her behavior, neither Tom nor Alexandra was entirely certain about her motivations for seeking reconciliation. "Should I be worried?" Tom asked. "I don't think so. I think she's genuinely trying to make amends, but it might be awkward." The conversation with Zar came during dinner, when she approached their table with the kind of careful diplomacy that marks someone who had learned from previous social mistakes. "Alexandra, Tom," she said with a smile that appeared genuine but cautious. "I wanted to congratulate you both on the Foundation's success. The program's statistics are quite impressive." "Thank you, Tsar," Alexandra replied with professional courtesy. "We're proud of what we've been able to accomplish. I also wanted to apologize again for my behavior last year. I was concerned about things that turned out not to matter, and I said things that I shouldn't have said." Tsar's apology seemed sincere, but Tom could see that it was also strategic. The Foundation's success had changed the social dynamics that had once made their relationship seem inappropriate or unlikely. "We appreciate that," Tom said simply, choosing to accept the apology at face value rather than explore the complex motivations behind it. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Tsar expressing genuine interest in the Foundation's work and offering to contribute both financial support and volunteer time. By the time she returned to her own table, both Tom and Alexandra felt that a significant social obstacle had been overcome. The evening's formal program began with Alexandra's speech about the Foundation's mission and achievements. Standing at the podium where she had once issued a playful challenge to dance partners, she now spoke with passion and authority about the work that had become her life's purpose. "1 year ago, I stood in this ballroom and learned something that changed my life forever," she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "I learned that the most meaningful connections aren't based on social status or financial compatibility, but on shared values and mutual respect." The speech continued with specific examples of families who had been helped by the Foundation's programs, told in language that emphasized dignity and empowerment rather than charity or pity. Alexandra had learned to speak about poverty and struggle in ways that honored the strength of people facing challenges rather than positioning them as victims in need of rescue. As she concluded her remarks to enthusiastic applause, Tom felt a pride that went beyond personal affection. Alexandra had not just changed careers, she had discovered her true calling and was using her considerable talents to make a meaningful difference in the world. But the evening's most significant moment was yet to come, and Tom found himself checking his pocket to ensure that the small velvet box was still safely positioned for the surprise he had been planning for weeks.